Hey everyone, welcome back to another video tutorial, and for this video tutorial we will be still looking at the topic of control structure. Now in our last video tutorial we looked at the sequential control structure, which is considered the most basic of the three that we will be looking at. In that control structure we saw that we were able to follow a step-by-step guide in order to solve a problem. The second control structure that we're looking at for this tutorial is known as the decision or selection control structure. This control structure is used whenever we want to make a decision between two or more options. Now in the example here, on the left, the gentleman is wondering if he should choose option A or B, right? So in order for him to be able to choose any of these options, he would have to know what the output or what the result is, and then he could be able to make his decision from there. Another quick example could be to decide what would happen if it was raining outside. So let's say it was raining on the outside, then we would take an umbrella. And if it was not raining, then what would we do? Automatically we would not take an umbrella. Now some keywords that we would also be looking at throughout completing solutions for the decision control structure are 1, if-then statements, and 2, if-then-else statements. All right, so the if-then works in a case where if it is raining outside, then what would happen? Then this means that we would take an umbrella, right? If this was not the case, then what would happen next? If this was not the case, then we would proceed to what the correct output would have been, or what the correct result would have been, which would be not to take an umbrella. So here we decided to make a decision to determine what would be the step we take if it was raining or not raining on the outside. The first problem that we're looking at is it says write a pseudocode algorithm to read two numbers and print the larger. Thing that we would need to do is to ensure that the user enters the two numbers, and then from here we can make a decision to see and determine which of the two numbers is the larger. So first we would start off by reading our first number into that location called num1, and then once that is done we would proceed to read our second number in a location called num2. Now from here the computer is ready to make the test to decide which of the two number is the larger. So now it's testing with the keywords that we identified earlier, which is the if-then. So it is saying if num1 is greater than num2, then what should we do? Well, if it is greater than num2, we were told to print the larger, which is num1. So in fact we would just proceed to print num1 because it was the larger. So let's say the user entered 10 in the location num1 and maybe 5 in location 2. So this if statement right here is suggesting if 10 is greater than 5, then we would print the larger, which would have been 10, and this was stored in the location called num1. So this is why we have the result print num1. After this has been completed, then we would proceed to end our if statement because we had no other instruction to do anything else. So we would end the if at this point. Let's say we wanted to make a further testing. So when we tested, we realized that num1 was not greater than num2. Then we would want to make a selection to something else which was a true statement. So let's see how this solution would go. Again, we're going to proceed to read our first num followed by reading the second num, and then we're testing the statement. So the statement was if num1 is greater than num2, then what would happen? So the first part of this, let's say it was true, then we would print num1. However, if it was not true, our next keyword, which we identified earlier, the else, the next part of the solution or the code is what would run, which would be to print the other number, because automatically the second number would have been the larger of the two. So in this case, num1 was 5 and then num2 was 10. So they're saying if num1 was greater than num2, then num1 would be printed. But because num1 contained 5 and num2 contained 10, we could not print num1. So we had to overlook this part of the statement and proceed to what the second part said, which was to print num2. And in fact, this line would be the one that was printed. Having done this, we had no other requirements to go anywhere else in the solution. So because we started our if statement, we would also proceed to end that if. And this is technically two ways that we could proceed to solving this problem. So we're seeing where we had one option and then we had to make a decision to decide between the two in another instance. Let's take a look at the next problem. So the problem indicates to write a pseudocode algorithm to read gender. If the letter M was entered, then we would display a message saying you are a male. So the first thing we know that we would be required to do is to read gender. Now, of course, based on the letter M, we know that gender would be of the data type character, and this is where we're only collecting one letter from the user. So we would start off by reading the gender. Once we read the gender, the computer identifies what letter was entered. So we're now proceeding to say with our keywords again, if the gender was equal to M. So if the user entered M, then what would we do next? Well, if the user entered next, they told us to print out this message, which indicates print you are a male. And from here, that was the only thing that we were required to do. So we would proceed to end our if statement, and that would have wrapped up our solution. Let's say in a second example, and adding to that, they wanted us to print a second part of this. If a letter F was entered, then the message would indicate that you are a female. Well, again, of course, we would start off by reading the gender. All right, so we're now testing both of the cases. We're reading for male and we're reading for female. So if the gender M was entered first, then what would be the message? The message would have been you are a male. So that's the message that would be displayed if M was entered. However, we would want to proceed to a second part of this solution. So our keyword again, and if. All right, so this part, the first part of the if statement, can be ended here because we got an output as to what to put if this person was a male. If it is that we wanted to proceed to the second part of the code, then we would use our keyword, which is else. So we're saying if whatever the user entered for gender was not what was up here, then what would happen in a next case? Well, the else implies that we're going to proceed to a second option. So we're testing now if the gender F, the letter F was entered for gender, then what would happen here? Well, they told us if we're seeing F in the system, give them this message to say you are a female. So we would print you are a female. And then from here, we had a second if, so we would proceed to end our second if. So this again would be testing two things, right? So this is slightly different from the two numbers that we just did. So they're testing, you're going to be getting a result any way you take it. If you enter M, you will get a result. And if you enter F, you will also get a result. But what exactly would be the result? There is a particular result to print if it was M, and there's another result to print if it was F. So either way, if it was a male or female, there would have been a designated message to display to either of these gender. All right, we're looking now at our next problem where it says to write a pseudocode algorithm to read gender. If the letter was entered, then we would display the message. Well, this is technically the previous problem, but for this we will be looking at how we would represent this on a flowchart diagram. So we saw flowchart in some previous videos ago, and then we're now gonna be looking quickly as to how the decision works on that flowchart. Again, if we can remember, we start off with our terminal, which is the start, followed by our directional arrow, which points to the next stage that is coming on. After that, we would read our gender. Once we read the gender is stored into this location called gender. Again, we have our connecting arrow, which shows that we're proceeding to our next stage. Now from here, once we read the gender, a decision needs to be taking place. So we remember that a decision goes into the symbol of a diamond. So we no longer enter if gender equal M. We technically switch it up a bit to make it become a question. So we start off to say, is gender equal to M? So we're now asking a question because we want to get a response that evaluates to either yes or no. So is gender equal to M? If the result was a yes, then what would happen? Well, if it was a yes, we're now pointing to a message that says, print you are a male. Again, we go back to the decision for the second part, which would be the false output or the false aspect. So it is saying again, is the gender equal to M? So if we had entered no, then what would happen? We would not have any message being printed out. So automatically this means that we would proceed to the end. And now we're just showing this to say that this would proceed to stop, and this indicates that we have come to the end of our problem solving phase. So as you can see, our connector keywords yes or no. So we're testing to see if it was a yes for the gender M, what would happen? They would get a message, and if it was a no, then they would directly go to stop the program. A second example, just to use the second part of that problem with the female. Again, we start with our terminal, which start arrow followed by the reading of the gender. When the computer read the gender, they're now gonna be testing to see if the gender was M. So again, we're testing for M. So if it was M, then we would print the message, you are a male. And if it was not M, then automatically we know that it would have been the other gender, which was female. So here the message to be displayed would be you are a female. And then from here we know that we have come to the end of our program, so we would make our connectors and then proceed to stop this flowchart or this problem solving stage. So that's technically how we would proceed to do the flowchart of this problem solving technique. And this is our final problem as it relates to using the decision control structure. Now it says to write a pseudocode algorithm to read scores. If the score is greater than or equal to 60 and less than or equal to 70, we would print the letter C. However, if the score is greater than 70 and less than or equal to 79, we would print the letter B. If the score is greater than or equal to 80, then we would print the letter A. So as you can see, this problem is a little bit more advanced than the previous ones, as this would be requiring us to do 3 things. So we move from 1 stage to 2 stage, and now we're including a 3rd stage. So let's go ahead and see how this solution would proceed. All right, so we start off by reading the scores because that is what they ask us to do. And once we have read the score, we're now testing to see what would be the decisions that are made. So the first part that they give us is that if the score is greater than or equal to 60 and at the same time less than or equal to 70, then we would print the letter C. So again, we're going to be removing the excess wording and replacing those with symbols or mathematical operators. So our keyword if score, and we have the greater than sign followed by the equal sign, which means greater than or equal to 60. And the next part of this if statement, less than or equal to 70, then what would happen? Well, they asked us to print the letter C, so that's exactly what we would do. Following this, we have completed the first part of our if statement, so we would end this section of the if. We're not through with the if statements overall, so we would proceed using our keyword else. All right, so we're now at the second part. The second part states if the score is greater than 70, while at the same time less than or equal to 79, we would print B. So it would show us this if the score with the greater than 70 sign and at the same time less than or equal to 79 with our keyword then, what would happen? They told us to print the letter B, and that's exactly what we did here. Again, this part of the if statement is finished, so we would put our end if to say the second if has been completed and solved, and then finally we would proceed to our third if again, or else to say that we're still proceeding to our next section. So again, the final part says if the score is greater than or equal to 80, then we would print A. Again, or if statement, if the score is greater than or equal to 80, then what would happen? Well, of course, we were told to print A. And finally, we would end our third if. So this is technically how we would go about using the if then else statement, and you already got the understanding of when we would use the different aspect of this. Thank you guys so very much for tuning in, and I do hope that you grasp the concept of the decision or control structure, and I do hope to see you in our next video tutorial where we will be looking at the loop control structure. Again, thank you so very much for tuning in.